Thanks everyone for attending our presentation today, and I also want to start just by thanking Insika and all of the sound engineers and people that have been patient with us as we've tried to fit this format into the sort of standard image presentation of Insika. So we have some sound elements. We hope that they will play well, and I think we're in good shape, but it's a bit different than what happens occasionally. So I want to start just by doing some introductions and talk a little bit about what our project has done. It's also important, I think, to know as we present this that this talk is in tandem with an exhibition at the Trust Arts Center called A Device for Measuring the Sonification of Everyday Things. So seeing that show would give you maybe a different or additional perspective on the conversation here if you have a chance to get over there. It's a bit, it's close to the center here. It's 5 blocks about, and it's right on the corner of Liberty and Wood, if that helps you find it. So if you have a chance, stop by and see the show. So my name is Andrew Casto, and first I will introduce the people on the presentation panel here with me. So, regrettably, we're without our engineer today, Stephen Beek. And as we've discovered with many parts of collaborating with each other, some things become difficult to work out. And Stephen was not able to be here with us today, so we're down one, and we're going to do our best to make it work without him. But he did contribute substantially to the project, so I want to just say a little bit about Stephen's work and his role with us. Stephen is currently an assistant professor in mechanical and industrial engineering at the University of Iowa, where he leads the Innovative Design and Art Laboratory, also known as the IDEA Lab, and is a faculty researcher of the Virtual Soldier Research Program at the Center for Computer-Aided Design. He received BS and PhD degrees in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Seoul National University. Next to my right is Jean-Francois Charles. He is a composer, clarinetist, and live electronics designer. After undergraduate studies at the National Institute for Applied Sciences in Lyon, he studied in Strasbourg with the Italian composer Ivan Fedele. Good enough. As a clarinetist, he worked with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen for the world premiere recording of Rector Augenbrauentans. Yeah.
Say that 5 times
I did take
fast.
German in high school.
Nice.
So he got his PhD in music composition at Harvard and has been an assistant professor in composition and digital arts at the School of Music at the University of Iowa since August of 2016. And on my left is Evan Durazo, who was born in Park Ridge, Illinois, and who was a cellist for over 10 years and then began an art-making career in 2006. He attended Cranbrook Academy of Art for his MFA in 2016. He has a BFA from Northern Illinois University in ceramics and has participated in numerous exhibitions, including Insika's first annual juried student exhibition in Philadelphia, having had solo shows in DeKalb, Illinois, and other regional and national international exhibitions, including the Jane Hartsook Gallery in New York City and the Salvatore Lanteri Gallery in Milan. And it says here that he likes animals, film, video games, and music, and drinks coffee.
A lot of coffee.
A lot of coffee.
A lot of coffee.
And last but not least, Evan will read about me.
Yeah. Because it would be a little weird, right, for Andy to just be like, Andy was born here. Yeah.
It seemed
right,
like
so I'm
this
going
was
to read
better.
for Andy here. Yeah. Andrew Casto on my right receives his BA from Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, and his MA and MFA degrees from the University of Iowa. After serving as assistant professor at Mount Mercy and Kansas State Universities, Casto returned to the University of Iowa, where he is currently an assistant professor of art teaching ceramics and a member of the Public Digital Arts Faculty Initiative. He was the 2011 MJD Fellow at the Archie Bray Foundation for Ceramic Art in Helena, Montana, and has exhibited work internationally in Spain, Croatia, Italy, Austria, Slovenia, Belgium, China, Switzerland, France, and Japan. Wow, man. Casto was awarded the second place award in the 2013, 7? Roman numerals always throw me off. 7 Biennial International de Ceramic in El Vendrell, Spain, and the 2010 Foulet Prize by the International Ceramic Magazine Editors Association in Fupeng, China. He was selected as a recipient of the 2015 Emerging Artist Award by the National Council on the Education for Ceramic Arts and SECA, and was a finalist for the 2017 Young Masters Melis Grand Ceramics Prize with Cynthia Corbet Gallery, London. Casto has completed recent solo exhibitions at Galleria Salvatore Lanteri in Milan, Italy in 2016, and also Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami in 2017.
Okay, so we'll start with talking a little bit about why we're interested in sound. So this project partly began as a conversation between Jean-Francois and Stephen and I, who all happened to work at the University of Iowa, and we're all part of a collaborative, sort of digitally focused faculty initiative. And much of our efforts have to do with thinking about how our research can impact and contribute to each other. So for me, if there's anything I care about as much as ceramics, it would be music. And I was raised in a household that valued music. My mother is a classically trained organist, and I was often surrounded by music growing up. So this led to me spending most of college playing in rock bands, and thankfully I found the more secure career path of ceramics. We can all laugh, right?
Right.
And as a result, I still kind of have a sensitivity or a desire to be involved in things that have to do with what I would say are more like, musically inclined moments of creativity rather than just visual. And Evan, maybe you could share some about how that's been for you.
Well, and just that there's this interesting parallel between the two. You know, when I started making objects years ago, I quickly started catching on to this concept of, you know, looking at a surface of glaze and maybe a form, and starting to just wonder naturally what would that sound like if you could hear it rather than see it.
Yeah.
And it started to drive me mad a little bit because as a former musician, I started feeling like art was just too quiet. I mean, how often do we go into shows and it's just silent, and you're supposed to just read the pieces and have them speak to you and whatnot? Sometimes it just feels too quiet. So I just started questioning the concept of, you know, why aren't these two more a unified field? You know, why are they disparately separate, although have so many commonalities? You know. But you know, same as Andy. You know, having gone through music school, I ended up dropping out from Western Michigan. I just woke up one day and realized it wasn't the path for me. When you're playing with other cellists that started at 2 and 3 years old, you know, they don't have much social skills, but they can just play you under the table. You know, and it's a hard enough world to be a musician. You know, in that right, especially a classical musician. So. You know, that quickly went the way of the dodo. But yeah, I realized that having changed to art years later, that there were just too many parallels to ignore. And so I'm still thinking about that today, and that relationship between like quiet art and sound, and how those could maybe be brought together in a more unified way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, son?
Yeah, so while we talked about that, my main focus as a composer is to deal with live electronics. So that means, for instance, composing a piece for a classical instrument plus some live electronic transformation. And so it could be either with like a synthesizer made of guitar pedals, or with a computer. So I was immediately interested in this project for the art science side of it.
And having gotten to know Jean-Francois some over the past 2 years, I can tell you he is often on campus leading a group called the University of Iowa Laptop Orchestra, and doing various sort of experimental electronics musical performances that are always quite engaging and fun to see. So we'll say a tiny bit about our work here too, to familiarize people with what we do. These are some recent pieces of mine, and I'm generally making fairly small work right now that deals with conversations about gravity as sort of personal metaphor. So stress and erosion on a macrocosmic scale being translated in kind of a personal way. but yet as an opportunity for perhaps refinement or purification, as highlighted by gold luster on the pieces. So my hope is to talk about how life's hardships perhaps make us stronger, better versions of ourselves. And that's the sort of general methodology that I'm operating with as I'm making work. And Evan, maybe there's a moment when you can say something.
Yeah, sure. And you know, similar to Andy, my work is also a kind of investigation of my own place and identity in this world we inhabit. For me, you know, my forms and glazes carry with them an investigation of my own place and identity in the world. Growing up in the Midwest suburbs, you know, a very safe world, and kind of, you know, being released from that when I was a late teenager and realizing I know nothing about the world. You know, I was living in my own bubble. I also experienced a lot of physical disability, chronic pain, and so the work lately has become sloppier and sloppier, and that's due to my health issues. I can't focus as much as I used to on fine craft. If you look at my very old work, unfortunately I don't have any images of those, but much cleaner, much more precise, much more focused on the craft of the thing rather than the concept behind it and what it might mean or feel like. Yeah.
Great. So we began this conversation thinking about how we could take our existing work and make something that had more to do with sound out of it. And thankfully I had these associations with Jean-Francois and Stephen, and quickly kind of began this conversation about what it would be like to perhaps make music using the pieces. Could we perhaps play the pieces in a space? And that for me was a really exciting thought. It became clear fairly quickly that we needed to do digital images of the work that would be in the exhibition. And that, you know, also presented kind of a hardship in some ways. I don't know about all of you that are also makers, but I am certainly guilty of working to the very last minute on a project so that and it's out of an honest desire to always show the best, most current thing, right? But you wind up really pushing boundaries, at least I do. And for this project, we had to have this work done substantially earlier. Evan mailed work to me maybe a month ago.
What a month, guys.
Yeah, so that we could have it to actually photograph for the show. And when I say photograph, eventually I'll get to this slide here. Stephen, our engineering collaborator, is running this laboratory on campus at the University of Iowa that features kind of at its core this dome scanner that's 19 feet wide that allowed us to take images of these pieces. And so these are kind of our initial trials at thinking about this. Here's Jean-Francois trying to do this with a cell phone scanning program in my studio at the university. And while this was interesting, we didn't maybe get as high resolution or as accurate of images. Part of what we're trying to do is build a composite image all the way around a piece so we get all of the information to work with. Do you want to say anything about this part of our initial attempts?
Well, the initial attempts were necessary for us to get started on the first prototype, because when I get to explaining the sonification, it requires quite some programming time, so that had to be anticipated. So that's why we did that as soon as we could, and because we couldn't do it with Steve, I just 3D scanned the objects with a cell phone, which actually was quite interesting and quite useful.
Yeah. And so here's Stephen inside the dome, and this dome features 100 Canon DSLR cameras mounted on every sort of juncture of these bars, and here's a moment of him starting it up.
Are those all taking shots right now?
They're all turning on simultaneously.
Okay. Kind of learning about this project with you guys today.
Well, and it's also been, from Evan's perspective, he's kind of heard about all this from a distance. he had the luxury of just mailing the pieces to us.
Yeah.
So
Staying in Michigan, sending them out to Iowa, and being done with it.
So
Yeah.
we were able to just place these all on the floor, and then Steven kind of digitally was able to manipulate them. So here we are installing in the scanner. And normally this scanner is used for different projects. There's a project they're working on called the Virtual Soldier Project, which helps them understand how people in combat situations like get various types of fatigue. It's used for lots of different types of imaging. And so, but it captures images like this, where it's a composite of the piece, and every one of those blue squares is a vantage point of a camera. And then Steven's able to edit out the floor. So that's one of Evan's pieces there, two of Evan's pieces in the image. I've installed a lot of art shows. I've never installed a scanner show before. This was a new experience. And so this then led Jean-Francois to build this program that ultimately makes sound, and we'll have a demonstration here shortly from him on this, but this is kind of a rudimentary version of the program. We were also really fortunate to be able to use these wonderful speakers that he gave to us, which are actually IKEA salad bowls, flipped upside down, but they're awesome.
Yeah, those hemisphere speakers, it's actually quite a common design among laptop orchestras around the United States. And laptop orchestras, they started in Princeton, Stanford, and there are many now. And they experimented with several designs, spherical speakers, and they kind of stabilized on a hemisphere speaker. And traditionally, laptop orchestras, they have just laptops and those speakers. And at the University of Iowa, we also incorporate instruments. So it's, but basically, you like the speakers, so you wanted them for the show.
Yes, absolutely. So we had to do some initial trials of this, and this is the first moment that I had it working actually on my computer after Jean-Francois sent me the program, and I was very, very pleased that it was actually functioning. There's always risk involved in these type of projects because you don't know, the whole time if it's actually going to work. So, and their speakers even have great colored chords on them. Okay, your turn.
Yeah. So when we talked about this project, it's really the question of data sonification, and there are many ways of turning data into sound. So you could do that in a very intuitive way, like basically what you mentioned, like how would that sound? And you would compose something, or you would improvise by watching a piece of art. And that has been done a lot, like forever in the history of art, basically. And actually, I kind of incorporate that in the sonic engines that I use, because I was looking at the piece, and when you see a piece like that, there is there are things, as you say, that are refined, like gold luster. So to me, I associated that to single sine waves, so like the most simple of all sounds, if we want. And then there's also noise as things you cannot really define. There's a complex organicity of the pieces. So that's why I also use noise. And I used something in between that is a basic synthesizer sawtooth wave. So you'll get to hear those three kind of sounds. So that was more like an intuitive interpretation of the works. But then really the sonification based on data, it's open. You could do it a million ways. So my way was also to look at the piece not as a fixed thing, because a shape is fixed as an abstract shape, whereas music evolves over time. There is no music without time. Whereas the piece, we could argue, maybe it can exist without time. That's arguable, but it's a question. But what's true is actually where is the dynamic aspect of those pieces? And the truth is, the piece is dynamic as soon as you look at it, because when you look at it, you see at different angles. So you move around the piece. So that was my idea for the dynamic that is in music. So the varying sonic landscape, basically. And then what to do with this shape? Well, and it's all a question of choice, because technically today there's really no limitation. And what's interesting in all those talks, like this morning, wonderful talks, also in the 3D clay printing conference. So what's interesting is what do you do with it and why? Because the technology, everything is possible today. So anyway, I looked at this piece as the piece exists, and with the sound, what am I going to do? So I chose to explore the empty space. So basically the negative space of that piece. And I did that in a very simple way, very naive, if you wish. Very naive is that's from my notebook. So
he also called it ceramics.
Oh yeah.
Which I like.
So basically, I have balls. I decided to place balls around the piece, and those balls would explore the piece, would explore the empty space, the negative space. And each ball has a little synthesizer inside of it. And this synthesizer will make sound according to basically two parameters. If it's under the piece, it would be lower. And if it goes higher, it would be a higher pitch. So that's a very simple mapping. And the other simple mapping would be the distance to the object. So the object has actually some gravity attached to it. It's like a gravity field that attracts the balls. So when the ball touches the object, the volume is almost zero. So basically, you don't hear the ball. But the further away it is, the more you hear it. And then that makes a dynamic system. So the way I built it was.
And we have an example of this to show you soon as well. So if you're imagining this, you will soon get to see.
So there is a piece, and there are balls around. And to make that happen, I use three engines. The first engine is a physics engine. So there is an attraction field of the piece, and the piece also has some bounciness. So if something bumps into the piece, it will bounce off the piece. Also, all of the balls, and I chose 27. Why? I chose 27. And each ball has a mass and some bounciness as well. And that mass and that bounciness is actually controlled by a low frequency oscillator. That just means that vary over time. So the balls over time will become more heavier or lighter, and will be more or less bouncy. So that's what happened with the physics engine. Then the second engine is the visualization engine, because we want to see them. And if you visit the exhibition, basically, that's what you see on the wall. So the ceramic, there's the model, there's this 3D model that we scan, there's the color, there's the scale of the model, and each ball also has color, texture, size. And, well, finally, of course, the goal is to go to the sonification. So there is a sonic engine, which is a synthesizer, so 27 voice, one voice per ball. And I think what's interesting in there is what kind of relation between the model, between the ceramic and the balls that inhabit the space, and the synthesizer. So what we need is just the 3D coordinates of each ball. So that's what flows from one engine to the synthesizer. Just where are those balls? And so that's the data I'm actually literally sonifying. And then there is some varnish on the on the audio engine, so low pass filter, reverberation, limiter, well. So in the end, we have a program with basically 35 parameters if we count all of them. And the interface, from my point of view, looks basically like this. So I'm going to show you and to have you hear how it sounds.
Skip over.
So that's my vision of it. And during the exhibition, it's just shown full screen. So when you visit the exhibition, that's what you see, and that's what's behind the scenes. So if we want to explore parameters, we could have, for instance, the physics engine. I can change which piece is there in the middle. So that's another piece. Or I could change, as I told you, the bounciness of the balls. Right now they are quite bouncy, they bounce around. But now, here I'm going to decrease the bounciness. And suddenly, they are going to stick to the ceramic that attracts them, because they are not bouncy anymore. And the sounds that you hear right now are made by the pieces according to the question, are they far from the piece? And right now they are not far, so you don't hear anything. So to hear them, I have to make them bouncy. So let's make them very bouncy. And we can make them even lighter, very light maybe. Then they will go faster. So that's the first engine, the physics engine. The second one is the visualization. So, okay, sorry. Visualization. I could just go closer with the camera in the 3D space. So, for instance, you could try to see it closer. Here you can see the texture I applied to the balls. You could change the color of the balls. Well, pretty much any kind of visualization you can think about. I included elevation range, just seeing from below or from above, things like that. So then the third engine is just making sound with that. So let's see what we have as parameters for the sound. So I have a center note. So what is the note when you are at the level of the ceramic? So it could be lower. So that, or higher. So when I told you about the noise versus luster, that would be simple sine waves. So that's the simple sine waves. That's the most pure sound. But my synthesizer can be a sawtooth wave, so more with more texture. Or it could be just noise. And then I also have a choice of scale here.
Great.
So then, after this design basically of the machine, the synthesizer itself, there is kind of a second part of the work to do. So I'm showing you here a very famous digital synthesizer, the DX7. Who already played one? Ah, you see, you know what that is. So the guys who designed this synthesizer, they made a machine that was already a lot of work. But then they had to make a second thing. They had to design presets, and that's a work that's at the junction between art and science. So the preset is to use the machine and to make a set of how do we adjust that 100 parameters, and does it do kind of a sax sound or a trumpet sound or a trombone sound or whatever, or a completely new sound. So designing presets is kind of an artistic work at the same time as it's technical. So that's one way. I have another slide about presets, and it's this one. So Snapchat, they have an engine that tracks your eyes, that tracks your lips, and then what do they do with it? So then they give that as a second job of design presets. So that are, for instance, 6 presets using the Snapchat engine. So that was the next step for that. So once we have 12 pieces that we scanned, was to kind of look at them, and for each of them find a set of parameters that would fit them, maybe. And that's really a very subjective matter, by the way.
Yeah.
So we can have a look at those presets now. So I'll just make it full screen. This one was with noise. You can go through a couple of them. So everything is made live. When you visit the exhibition, it's not obvious. You might think it's a video, but actually it is live processing and synthesis. Yeah, so that's for the Sonic engine.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so we have just a couple more things here, but we're close to being done. I guess and these are some shots here of the installation. From my perspective, as a community, NCECA and ceramics is often wrestling with questions about what we do with the technology that we possess. And many of these tools that we find in the Fab Lab here, or that we're sort of learning to build, have limitless possibilities. And I think as artists, it's our job to figure out how to do things that are actually progressive and interesting with these tools, or else they become just another kind of way of arranging space. So from my perspective, this was one attempt at combining technology with ceramic art. And I guess I hope that this project can be one of many, because I think that's how we move forward as we address these things as a field. It's been enjoyable to me to kind of explore it and to try new things with it. Here's a shot of the space, just an iPhone video of me walking around. But I think how these things operate in space and how we navigate those questions in the future become really interesting areas of research, and also a great function of this conference. It's a way that we can kind of address the curatorial aspects of shows to say, here is a way that I might present work in a research-based forum that's different perhaps than what I might do in a gallery or a commercial space. And that is the title of the show. And if you're wondering, we are the device. So the idea was the 4 of us, Stephen included, were becoming a unit that would measure the sonification of the everyday things that Evan and I produce. And we have a little time for Q&A if people would like to ask questions. And if you do, there's a microphone in the middle of the room, and you're welcome to come up, and we'll do our best to answer.
What intrigued me about this program, I had watched something on PBS years ago where they were using some kind of machine and they were taking pots that were thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years old, and this machine could go inside the wall of the pot and they could actually still see movement inside of these things. Like we know pots have movement even after they come out of the kiln for 6 months or more. And they could see movement, and they also said they could tell what kind of music was being played when that person made that pot.
Wow.
And I wondered if any of this, if you were listening to music as you created that form, and how it correlates. I'm not very scientific here.
Me neither.
Yeah.
How it correlates to how it sounded. Was there any correlation
That-
to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am always sort of oscillating between music and podcasts when I'm working. And I don't know that we didn't directly talk about maybe how these things might interact sonically, but I do know Jean-Francois and I talk about music sometimes. I've frequently talked about Brian Eno, or I'm always trying to get him to listen to this band Tortoise that I really like, and I don't think he's done it yet. But some of those things that I like actually do, I think, resonate with some of the sounds in the in the exhibition. So it's perhaps unintentional, but I do think that it's a factor. How about you, Ed?
Oh yeah, definitely plays a pretty big role. I'll often get down to the studio if there's no music on. I can't work there very long. But then other times you get into the process and then it's 4 hours later and you haven't put on music yet. But I have noticed personally that the music very much drives my actions with my muscles, how I'm reacting to it. Certain climaxes and pieces, when you hear that climax coming, right? We all know with music, you can feel that thing driving up, right? And sometimes I'll throw a punch into the piece, and right when that rhythm hits, and it feels more confident and certain that there's no hesitation there, and so the music is kind of fueling my movement in a way. Yeah.
I think that's really true. Sorry, it's really true for me too. That the music influences how I'm making, and throughout the course of the day, in the studio, there's a rhythm that progresses, and it's present in the pieces and in what I'm listening to.
Yet it's not primary, though. It's not driving it.
No,
it's not the
it's
main
just
thing
part of
driving
it's
the work.
part of the event.
It's just more of a thing that's kind of standing next to you, like, Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I felt like I started paying more attention to what I was playing when I was creating, and I saw my work change
Yeah.
directly from
Right.
that,
Yeah.
and for better or worse.
Right. Yeah.
Certain things I just don't play when I throw, and there's some things I don't play when I do abstract work, and it influenced that. But I just wondered if there was a correlation for you there. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
welcome.
Just thinking also a difference between maybe music that we would listen to. Here the sound was meant to be during the exhibition, so
Okay.
we didn't want to compose a piece of music. We
Right.
wanted a sound that would not get in the way of the pieces, not get in the way of the exhibition. So that's also
Yeah.
why actually the presets I showed you, they are there is a sequence going on during the exhibition, and sometimes it's silent, and sometimes you hear it, and it's so it's a moving soundscape. It's not really like a piece of music with a definite form, with a beginning and an end.
Melody,
Because here,
yeah.
the beginning is when you enter the room, and the end is when you get out. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wondered if in looking back, there was any correlation where it paralleled in any way to what you listened to, and he completely separate came up with. And have you examined that?
I don't think it's been a conscious thing, but I do find that there are many parallels occurring
Yeah. Okay.
already. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I just had a quick question of other ideas that you had coming up, like when you were brainstorming, when you were bouncing around ideas for how to address this problem. Like what sort of ideas were you coming up with? Like what were the initial ideas?
I mean, I think this was the initial idea. I mean, we had questions about technically how to do it. And part of this came about by necessity. Like, we're all in the same space together at the university. And so you know, I go to these meetings and I think, what can I do with these guys that could influence all of us and make all of our practices stronger? And I think right away we all were impressed by Steven's dome scanner, and it became a question of like, how can we get our hands on that? And it was just sort of a natural combination. He had a project where he made a virtual potter's wheel very early on. I mean, there have been lots of things like this, and he's not, doesn't have any familiarity with ceramics, so it's sort of interesting to watch. But it has sort of like I think there's a glove and then a rotating kind of lazy Susan, and the glove is like hooked up to some wires, and then on a screen you can actually throw a pot, except it's only one hand, so those of us that throw pots know that, like, kind of, I don't. Anyway, so there were a lot of initial conversations about shared research ideas that we had done, and I think the first question was like, how do we make music with this? I don't know that there were a lot of other options on the table.
However, we did know from the very get-go, and Andy reached out to me right away. I was like, you mean a project where we try to imagine what things might sound like if they,
Yeah.
if they could be heard instead of seen? Yeah. And right from there, we
Yeah.
kind of knew the end result where we wanted to be. But yeah, good question. We didn't know at all where the parameters would come in and how we would block ourselves in, because with such an expansive idea, it's like you really do have to give yourself parameters, or else it can go pretty haywire pretty fast. Yeah.
And we didn't know like the video of the actual operations happening to make the sound playing in the space was either your idea or Steven's, I don't remember, but that came about in a meeting, and they said, we could have this playing on the wall in the space, and I thought, yeah, perfect.
I think it's by brainstorming the idea of inhabiting the negative space that idea came rather early, and we might have had others, but then we kept this one. And showing it or not, it would depend if it was like smooth enough to show, and things like the number of balls that I told you, why 27? Well, currently, to have everything work fine, I couldn't do it with like 500 balls. It would be too slow.
Too much processing
So
power.
the physics would not work as smoothly. So, yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, I've got a question. First off, great job, really cool.
Thank you.
And I know there's a million ways to go about it, and I'm kind of curious about some of the choices, like using a diatonic scale. Did you try a seamless a scale also, or because that was a preset? All those are choices, of course.
Yeah, we could maybe switch back to my computer for the presentation, because I could. I don't know. Yeah.
There you go. You're up
It
there.
is. So actually, in some of the presets, I have something like maybe like that. Let me see. Can we hear it?
And that's with white sound.
So here there's no. Or I could also do that. I could do glissando basically. Let me let me make it bounce.
So but the intervals are being chosen by a preset.
Well, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, right,
I
exactly.
think in my personal composition, I would not use a diatonic scale or a minor scale or a pentatonic scale. I would certainly use much more.
Yeah, I mean, you could use modalities.
Yeah, I wouldn't go with that. Yeah.
These are questions that I've been getting asked at the show, and I said,
Yeah.
he did it.
So glissando would be like that.
When I was at the show, this was the sequence that was on, yeah. Sounds great. The other thing I was wondering is if, I work with sound a lot also, and if you thought about attempting to resonate the pieces themselves and have them generate the noise in the room and to be captured by your dome, would be by...
Captured in sound then.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, but yeah,
So-
the dome is actually a dome of 100 video cameras. They might have
Exactly.
microphones, built-in microphones. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And then you could have the impulse
Oh, there's
response
mics on
Exactly
of
right.
the, of
Exactly
the piece
right.
itself. No, there are a million ways to go.
There are a
Indeed.
million ways.
Next
That-
year. Next year.
And the balls
Yeah.
are actually moving virtually
Yeah,
Right,
completely.
yeah.
But
and based on gravity or
actually,
sensitivity.
like another question linked to that could be why make that a live thing? We could just make a video and just put in the space. And what is the reason to make it live? Truly, there is no reason, except if we consider it as a first step. Because
And a good
but then what do you do with it? Like something easy to do would be when people are in front, when people are visiting the room, it gets more active. You know, you detect just a simple video camera here, you just detect if people are walking around, and you make it more active or not. But it's all a question of choice and like why do you do it? Is it a gimmick or is it the work? So
Another thing that occurred to me looking at it was, I mean, you decided to explore the negative spaces of the piece, which is one way to do it. It might be interesting to see if a clean space with the piece in it would begin to build up a harmonic resonance that might be a little different than
yeah,
a space without
Alvin
it.
Lucier is sitting in a room with the objects.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like that.
Exactly. So it would be, but it's always about reflection and the
Yeah.
way sound bounces off.
I should take
Anyway.
notes.
Anyway,
No, I
really
like
great
it.
job though.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we probably are past our time here, and we should. No, we have more. We have time for one more. Okay, one more question if anyone else has one. And if not, that's okay. Oh,
At the beginning of your lecture, you mentioned, as you were talking about making physical objects, and during the making and during the reflection of those, thinking about, well, what does this sound like, and how you believe that there are these parallels between visual and object and sound. And I'm curious. I'm craving more thoughts on
More
that.
on that. It's quite an abstract idea, I know, because really, it comes down to an opinion, right? What you think blue might sound like, I might think it might sound on the completely opposite side of the spectrum, right? But there's, and I don't have synesthesia, none of that kind of stuff, but it's just more of that, I don't know about you, but I like to gaze at texture and color and really zoom in, get intimate with an object. And there is sound there. If you allow yourself to quiet down a bit, it's there. You just got to listen to it, And maybe I'm just crazy, right?
no,
But
I agree. I mean, and also there are noises made while working. I mean, I spend a lot of time putting luster on pieces with a tiny little luster eyedropper, and it kind of drags across, the surface. It's not going to make any noise, but it does have a resonance, and I don't know, there are sort of, yeah, maybe like that. So but I do think that there is kind of like a mood or a rhythm or something that happens that is similar in the making process to listening or even specifically playing music, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even a lot of people don't really listen to classical, but all that information's there too. These grandiose themes and Beethoven pieces and whatnot. You can look at certain forms that are just monolithic, and you feel that in his Fifth Symphony and Ninth Symphony and all that stuff. So there's totally that parallel there. Also, having been gone through art school and stuff, Kandinsky, the famous abstract painter, was a cellist. And that kind of sparked my interest more as I was reading art history. It was like, really? Other artists were also musicians? That's a thing? And then learning more about his own life and how his abstract paintings kind of came from that, idea of what does this piece look like? And so a lot of those early works from the 1910s and whatnot are very much visual, a kind of record of the music he was listening to at the time, But yeah, certain colors have weight to them, right? I would say black or red, those tend to have more heavy.
Yeah, right.
They've done studies on color and shown that red is one of the only colors that actually causes a physical response in your body. Your heart rate will speed up the more you stare at it. I had a living room that was all red, and my ex-girlfriend and I would always fight. They're surrounded by red. So there's something there though of color theory. But really, to answer your question, it at the end of the day, it comes down to just a thought-out opinion on it, right? Because it's whatever you think it can be, right? So, yeah.
Go for it.
One other
Thank you.
comment. In spaces like a cathedral or a museum, the space, when it's empty, has a sense to it or a sound to it. You can feel it in a way that you feel music, you can feel a space. And when you introduce an art object into that space, it changes the space and your sense of that space.
Yeah.
And so when I first heard about this idea, and why I came was because I thought it'd be interesting that an introduction of an art object into a space would create a different sound. And so I imagined that you had mapped the sound of an installation of multiple pieces to create a symphony of sounds that was that shape. And then as people move into that space and interact with that space, they would introduce new variances that would show you the relationship of the
He's taking notes again.
I see the audience or the participants to the art and to the space. So there's a kind of a three-dimensional relationship that would give you a kind of unique sonic experience of the space. Because mostly when we deal in visual concepts as ceramics people, and musicians deal in an audio space, and it just seems that this is the synthesis of those two relationships that's so intriguing that I'm very intrigued with the direction and the potential here for 21st century understanding of our senses and their relationships. It's very, very exciting. Thanks.
Thank you so much.